There are eyes that even long after the flesh has rotted away, still stare up from the depths of the water. There are depths that are never recorded, never named. And there are deep waters that the more you gaze into, the more they gaze back into you. Welcome back to Whisper Horror Channel, where we tell ghost stories not with screams, but with silence. If you're listening in the dead of night, put on your headphones and don't look out the window. Don't forget to leave a comment, because who knows, someone else might see what you're thinking. Today's story has no obvious ghost, no summoning rituals, no cries from hell, only a man who was never spoken of, and a lake that never closed its eyes. This is Eyes Staring from the Lake Bed. They say that if you venture deep enough into the ancient forests that have swallowed the entire northern mountain range, leaving behind familiar asphalt roads and faint signals of civilization, you will find a place called Morning Vale. Time here seems to slow down, imprisoned by vertical rock faces on all sides and layers of thick, never quite dissipating mist. The mist entwines with every wooden house, seeps through every leaf, carrying the damp chill and the smell of decaying earth, of secrets buried for generations. And in the very center of that morning valley, like a giant, emotionless eye staring up at the gray sky, lies an unnamed lake. The lake's water is strangely clear, so clear that on rare sunny days, one can faintly see rotting branches, moss-covered rocks, and even things that should not be seen, objects that have sunk years ago, lying still at the bottom. But no one, absolutely no one in Morning Vale, dares to wade into those waters. The elders of the region call it the Eye of the Unjustly Dead. They say that long ago, this lake witnessed an execution without justice, and it has forever remembered it. The story I am about to tell you is the story of the day that I once again opened. Night in Morning Vale is unlike night anywhere else. It is not merely the absence of light. It is a living entity, thick and heavy, pressing down on the valley with an invisible weight. Tonight, that entity seemed even heavier than usual. Its cold sharp as a knife, cutting into the skin. In the small alley behind the Rusty Lantern Tavern, only a faint light struggled against the darkness. It was a sickly yellow, old light bulb, hanging precariously above the back door of the pub. Its light flickered, now bright, now dim, like the dying breath of a man about to expire, casting distorted, grotesque shadows that danced a macabre jig on the damp, stained brick wall. Amidst this scene, a figure was moving, silently and diligently. It was Arlo. Arlo was a part of Morning Vale, yet never truly belonged there. He was in his 40s, with a thin, gaunt physique, the result of years of hard labor and a life of scarcity. But what made him different? What made him an outcast, an invisible ghost among the community, was not his circumstances, but the perpetual silence fate had imposed upon him. Arlo was born mute. His throat was a prison, holding captive all the words, the cries, the screams he would never be able to utter. He communicated with simple gestures, nods, shakes of the head, and a makeshift sign language that few in town bothered to learn. To them, Arlo was simply the mute, a vague existence, a solitary shadow doing odd jobs no one else wanted to earn a living. Tonight, his job was to clear out empty bottles for the tavern. Every movement he made was precise, without a wasted sound. He picked up the bottles, placing them gently into wooden crates, trying not to make any sound that could disturb the alley's stillness. Silence was his world, his only companion. He was used to it, even comfortable with it. But tonight, there was something different in this silence. A tension, A sense of unease as if a predator was lurking somewhere in the darkness. Suddenly, a clank echoed from the end of the alley. A dry, sharp sound, cutting through the night. Arlo froze. His entire body tensed like a guitar string. The bottle in his hand nearly fell to the ground. He slowly, very slowly, turned his head. Eyes squinted, trying to peer through the thick curtain of darkness. From the shadows, two figures emerged, illuminated by the sickly yellow light, casting two long, distorted silhouettes. One was a large, burly man, wearing a thick, worn leather jacket, his face crude and full of authority. That was Gideon, owner of the largest sawmill in the region, a figure both respected and feared by the entire town. The other was a young man, thin and trembling like a leaf in the wind. His face was as pale as paper, his eyes wide, filled with terror. That was Samuel, a young man who had recently become a father. Arlo realized he had to do something. He retreated, deeper into the shadows, hiding behind the moldy, smelling trash bins. His body almost merged with the night, only his eyes glowing, observing. He held his breath, trying to make himself invisible. His heart began to pound, each beat reverberating in his chest like a war drum signaling an ill omen. Gideon's voice boomed, deep and menacing, like the growl of a bear. "You think you can fool me, punk? You think that money can just disappear without anyone knowing?" Samuel's voice stammered, trembling, almost breaking with fear. I don't know. I swear, Mr. Gideon, I didn't take anything. There must be some mistake. I just needed to borrow some money for my child. He's very sick. I'll pay it back. I promise. Gideon sneered, a chilling, cold sound, devoid of any human warmth. It echoed against the alley walls and bounced back, like a taunt. He stepped forward, his gait heavy and overwhelming, backing Samuel against the cold brick wall. Samuel had nowhere to go. "Mistake?" Gideon repeated, his voice now almost a deathly whisper. "I'll show you a mistake. You sealed your own fate the day you dared to steal from Gideon." Samuel burst into tears. Hot tears streamed down his pale face. He slid down, hands clasped in supplication. "Please, Mr. Gideon, please, I'll do anything. I'll be your slave my whole life. Just spare me. My child needs me." Samuel's plea was lost in the cold, hopeless air. Gideon said nothing more. He wasted no more words. He reached into his thick leather jacket and pulled out a gleaming metal object. Under the sickly yellow light, it flashed with a cold, deadly gleam. Arlo, from the shadows, saw it. His entire body froze. It was an iron hook, the kind lumberjacks used to drag large logs, as thick as a man's wrist, with one end sharpened to a razor's edge, curved like the claw of a prehistoric beast. It was not a weapon made for killing, but precisely because of that, it was even more terrifying. Arlo was stunned. A silent scream was tearing through his chest, but no sound could escape. His throat choked, able to produce only strangled, desperate noises, the sounds of one being suffocated. He wanted to scream, to raise an alarm, to run for help, but his feet were nailed to the filthy ground. He was imprisoned in his own body, a helpless witness to the horror about to unfold. Gideon raised the iron hook high. The light shone on it, turning it into a crescent moon of silver, a moon of death. Samuel squeezed his eyes shut, his tear-stained face contorted in final despair. Then, the hook swung down. A horrifying sound echoed. Not a thump or splat as one might imagine, but a dry, gruesome splat, followed by the crisp crack of breaking bone. The sharp hook plunged deep into Samuel's chest, tearing through flesh and ribs with ease. Blood spurted. A stream of dark, hot blood sprayed onto the brick wall behind, forming a long, grotesque streak. Samuel's body collapsed to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. Without a sound, his eyes were still wide open, but all life had vanished, leaving only surprise and extreme pain. Gideon stood there, his breath heavy, his chest heaving. The iron hook in his hand dripped, drop by drop, blood onto the filthy ground, forming a small pool of blood slowly spreading. He looked down at the corpse at his feet, his face devoid of any emotion. No remorse, no disgust, only the cold satisfaction of a predator who had just brought down its prey. Suddenly, as if sensing something, Gideon turned his head. His gaze swept across the alley, and looked directly into the shadows where Arlo was hiding. For an agonizing, seemingly endless moment, Arlo thought he had been discovered. His heart stopped. His entire world narrowed to Gideon's eyes. He saw the brutality, the bottomless coldness in those eyes. A brutality that could kill without reason. But perhaps the darkness had protected him. Gideon merely squinted for a second, then turned away, perhaps thinking it was just a rat, or a shadow cast by the flickering light. He bent down, grabbed Samuel's collar, and dragged the body deeper into the darkness, where the alley opened onto the town's dump. Arlo remained rooted to the spot, his body trembling uncontrollably. The strong metallic smell of blood assaulted his nostrils. A sweet and sickening scent, mixed with the damp, moldy smell of the alley and the stench of garbage. He stared at the spreading pool of blood on the ground. It was like a bloodshot eye, staring at him, accusing his silence. He had just witnessed a demon in human form, and that demon, he was sure, had sensed his presence. Dawn in Morning Vale brought no warmth or hope. It simply replaced the darkness with a dull, grey light, making the entire valley look even more mournful. News of Samuel's death spread faster than a wildfire. It began with a scream from the garbage collector early in the morning, and then it seeped into every home, every conversation, becoming the sole topic in this tiny town. Inside Mrs. McGregor's general store, the air was thick with whispers. This store was the heart of Morning Vale, where all news, true or false, was exchanged through glances, hushed tones, and secretly lowered voices. Mrs. McGregor, a woman in her 60s with stark white hair and knowing eyes, was wiping her counter, but her ears missed nothing. "Another one," a woman said, her voice filled with worry. "Poor Samuel. They found him in the trash this morning. The sheriff said it looked like an animal attack." Another, more skeptical, interjected, "Animal attack? Right behind the pub? Nonsense. Someone definitely did this. This is the third person in 6 months." Just then, Arlo entered the store. The moment the door creaked open and his gaunt figure appeared, the conversations abruptly ceased. All eyes turned to him. Curious, scrutinizing eyes, and even a hint of fear. Then they quickly looked away, returning to selecting vegetables or reading an old newspaper, as if his presence was an ill omen, a reminder of the town's misfortunes. Arlo was accustomed to this. He was an island of silence in a noisy sea of people. He bowed his head, avoiding their gazes, his hand clutching a small piece of paper, on which a shopping list was drawn with crude pictures. In place of the letters he could not write, he quietly went to the counter, placing the paper there. He did not meet Mrs. McGregor's eyes, only bowed his head, waiting, like a beggar waiting for alms. Mrs. McGregor glanced at the paper, then at Arlo. In her eyes, Arlo saw a mixture of pity and a vague fear. The usual. Arlo? Bread, milk, and some bacon. Arlo simply nodded. A slight nod. Almost imperceptible. Suddenly, the door opened again, and Sheriff Finn entered. The atmosphere in the store once again fell silent. But this time it was a tense, expectant silence. Finn was the embodiment of law in Morning Vale. An aging man, his shoulders weighed down by the burden of unsolved cases and his own helplessness. "Good morning, Elspeth," Finn said to Mrs. McGregor, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "A black coffee for me. Last night was bad, I heard." "Finn," Mrs. McGregor replied, her voice full of sympathy. "Any leads?" Finn shook his head. A heavy, disheartened shake. He sighed, a breath carrying all the weariness of a sleepless night. "Nothing. No traces. No weapon. No witness. Like a ghost. This is the third person in 6 months. The townspeople are panicking." When Finn said the words "no witness," Arlo looked up. His gaze, a night tormented by horror and guilt, met the sheriff's eyes. For a brief moment, a flicker of hope ignited within Arlo. He wanted to step forward. He wanted to grab Finn's arm. He wanted to use his hands, his only speaking hands, to reenact everything. The alley, Gideon, the iron hook. Those images were screaming in his head, trying to escape. But then, he saw the impatience, the extreme exhaustion in Finn's eyes. He looked at the surrounding townspeople, who always looked at him with suspicion and avoidance. Would they believe him? A mute man, an outcast of society? Or would they think he was crazy, making up wild stories? Or worse, they would inform Gideon, and then that iron hook would find him. Fear, cold and cruel, strangled that fragile flicker of hope. Fear of Gideon. Fear of being mocked. Fear of not being believed. All of them combined, forming an invisible wall, trapping him in his own silence. Arlo bowed his head, his chest aching. He took the bag of groceries from Mrs. McGregor, his hands trembling as he placed a few coins on the counter, and quickly left the store like a fugitive. As he walked out the door, he heard whispers behind him, loud enough for him to hear. "That mute. He always looks shifty, suspicious. Who knows what's going on in that silent head of his?" Arlo tightened his grip on the grocery bag, his knuckles white. He walked faster, almost running, trying to escape those words. Words like invisible needles, pricking his skin and soul. He carried not only the grocery bag, but also the burden of a deadly secret. A burden slowly dragging him down. There was only one place in Morning Vale where Arlo felt at peace. That was the lake shore. The unnamed lake, with its water as still as a giant mirror, reflecting the grey sky and the surrounding steep rock faces. Here, there were no scrutinizing eyes, no bitter whispers, only silence. A vast, ancient silence, utterly different from the suffocating silence within him. But today, as Arlo sat on a mossy rock, staring at the water, that peace was gone. The lake before him was no longer a gentle friend. It seemed to be staring back at him, judging him. Its still surface was like a reminder of his silence last night, a silence that had abetted a crime. He picked up a flat stone, and with a familiar motion, skipped it across the water. 1, 2, 3, 4 times, before the stone sank, breaking the perfect stillness of the lake's surface, creating spreading ripples that then vanished, as if nothing had ever happened. Just like Samuel's death. Arlo shivered. He recalled last night, the image of the gleaming iron hook under the light, the dry sound of breaking bone, the spreading pool of blood on the ground, and Gideon's eyes. The cold, emotionless eyes of a demon. A shiver ran down his spine. A cold that did not come from the crisp wind blowing across the lake, but from within, from the depths of his soul. He clutched his shoulders, trying to ward off the cold, but to no avail. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him, the rustling of dry leaves, the snapping of small twigs. Arlo startled, his heart pounding as if it wanted to leap from his chest. He whirled around. It was Gideon. He stood a few meters away, his hands in the pockets of his thick leather jacket. He wasn't looking at Arlo, but at the lake, a cryptic half-smile on his lips. "This place is truly beautiful," Gideon said, his voice deep and even, without a ripple, yet it sent shivers down Arlo's spine. "Quiet. A good place to think, or to bury secrets." Arlo sprang to his feet, his body automatically shifting into a defensive posture, his entire body tensed, ready for a fight or a flight. Gideon now turned to look at Arlo. He slowly approached, each step heavy and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "Don't be afraid," he said. But his tone was far from reassuring. "I'm not here to harm you. I just want to talk." Arlo backed away. He shook his head frantically, his hands raised in front of him, shooing them away. A desperate gesture to create distance between himself and this demon. "I saw you in the store this morning," Gideon continued, completely disregarding Arlo's panic. "I saw the way you looked at Sheriff Finn. You looked like you wanted to say something." He stopped directly in front of Arlo, the distance between them now just an arm's length. He leaned down slightly, so their eyes were level. His voice dropped, almost a whisper, but it echoed in Arlo's head like thunder. "I know what you saw last night." The air seemed to thicken. Arlo felt breathless, as if an invisible hand was squeezing his throat. He looked directly into Gideon's eyes, and in those eyes, he saw nothing but cold cruelty and a deadly warning. "You're a smart one, Arlo," Gideon continued, his voice holding a hint of appreciation. Yet it sickened Arlo. "One who knows how to keep silent. That's a valuable asset in this town. Silence keeps people alive." He raised his hand and patted Arlo's shoulder lightly, a seemingly friendly pat. Yet it sent shivers through Arlo's entire body. The weight of Gideon's hand was a reminder of his terrifying power, the power that had taken Samuel's life. "Just keep quiet," Gideon whispered, his breath smelling of alcohol and tobacco. "It's best for both of us. You understand?" Gideon didn't wait for an answer. He knew Arlo couldn't answer. He looked at Arlo one last time. A meaningful gaze. A gaze that said, "I'm watching you. Don't make a mistake." Then he turned and walked away, his gait leisurely, self-assured, leaving Arlo alone by the lake, with extreme horror in the still lake. Arlo collapsed, his legs losing all strength. He gasped, trying to draw breath, but his chest ached. He looked down at the lake's surface. For the first time in his life, its silence no longer brought him peace. It seemed to be mocking him, reflecting his own helplessness and cowardice. He was not just a witness. His silence, the silence Gideon had just praised, had made him an accomplice. The lake remained calm, but Arlo felt as if something was stirring from its deep bottom, something cold and dark, like the secret he was hiding. The following weeks passed in a suffocating and tense atmosphere. Fear had become a second layer of mist covering Morning Vale, an invisible mist colder than the real one. Rumors of a beast or a ghost killer spread throughout the town, sowing panic and paranoia. And then, 2 more people died. A drunkard was found at the edge of the forest, his body brutally torn apart. A young girl disappeared on her way home, leaving only a long trail of blood on the dirt road. No one found her body. The town plunged into fear. People locked their doors when night fell. No one dared to go alone. Everyone looked at each other with suspicion. Anyone, anything, could be the killer for Arlo. Each new death was a stab at his conscience. He couldn't sleep. During the day, he was haunted by the fearful eyes of the townspeople. At night, he was tormented by nightmares. In his dreams, he saw Samuel, the drunkard, the young girl. They said nothing, only looked at him with empty, accusing eyes. And he saw Gideon, standing in the shadows, smiling at him, the iron hook in his hand dripping blood. He couldn't take it anymore. The fear of Gideon was still there. But now, the fear of becoming an accomplice to evil was even greater. He had to do something. Justice had to be served. The souls of the dead needed peace. On a moonless night, when the whole town had sunk into anxious sleep, Arlo sneaked into the old warehouse at the end of town, where he usually kept his tools. The air inside was cold and dusty. Cobwebs hung everywhere like shrouds. He paced back and forth in the warehouse, like a caged animal. His mind reeled. He had to tell the truth. But how? How could a man who couldn't speak tell a story? Then he saw a large wooden board, forgotten in a corner, and a piece of charcoal used for lighting fires. An idea flashed in his head. If he couldn't speak, he would draw. He took the wooden board and the charcoal. His hands trembled, but in his heart was an iron resolve. He knelt on the dusty floor, and began to draw. The first strokes were clumsy, shaky, but gradually, his hand became steadier. He was pouring all his horror, anger, and torment into every stroke. He redrew the alley behind the pub. He drew the flickering yellow light bulb. He drew two figures. A large, menacing figure. A small figure, kneeling and pleading. And then, he drew the iron hook. He drew it with haunting detail. He emphasized every deadly curve of it. The sharp head, the rough wooden handle. He drew it raised high, ready for a fatal swing. He drew it plunged into Samuel's chest. He even drew the blood. The wooden board was no longer just a wooden board. It had become a confession, an indictment, a silent scream for justice. When he finished the drawing, Arlo gasped, sweat dampening his forehead. He looked at his work. It was hideous, but it was the truth. He had to give this to Sheriff Finn. He couldn't ignore such clear evidence. He had to believe him. Just then, the warehouse door creaked open, emitting a chilling sound. Arlo startled, his heart pounding. His first instinct was to quickly hide the board behind his back. Two men entered. They were Gideon's henchmen. Men everyone in town knew but no one dared to cross. They were drunk, reeking of cheap alcohol. "Look who it is," one slurred. "The mute playing artist," the other cackled. A gruesome laugh. "What are you drawing, Arlo? Let us see." They advanced, surrounding Arlo. The air in the warehouse became suffocating. Arlo retreated, clutching the board behind his back. He shook his head, his eyes panicked, pleading. "Don't be shy," the first one said, his smile turning malicious. "We just want to see your artwork." Without another word, the first man snatched the board from Arlo's hands. He looked at the drawing. The smile on his face vanished. He stared at the image of the iron hook, at the image of Gideon. The drunken haze on his face disappeared, replaced by a chilling sobriety. He handed the board to the second man. This man's expression also changed. They looked at each other. A silent, deadly understanding passed between their eyes. They knew what they had seen, and they knew what they had to do. You. The second man stammered, his voice full of malice. You saw. The first man turned to look at Arlo. His eyes narrowed. The boss said to keep an eye on you. Turns out he was right. You're a rat who can't keep his mouth shut. Arlo realized the mortal danger. It was too late. He turned, intending to run for the door. But they were faster. They seized him, wrestling him to the dusty floor. Arlo struggled desperately. His throat emitted strangled, painful noises. The sounds of an animal being slaughtered. But no one could hear him. One man held his arms tightly, while the other pulled a rope from his belt. You like silence, don't you, Arlo? That man said, his voice full of sarcasm. We'll give you eternal silence. They roughly tied his hands, tightening the rope until it dug deep into his flesh. They stuffed a dirty, foul-smelling rag into his mouth, silencing his desperate, mute screams. They dragged him out of the warehouse, as one would drag an animal. The wooden board was left on the floor. On it, Arlo's silent drawing, his only indictment, had now become his own death sentence. The next morning, the sun cast weak rays down on Morning Vale. But it could not dispel the madness that had gripped the town. An angry crowd had gathered in the town square. They were ordinary townspeople, miners, lumberjacks, wives, mothers, but now, their faces were distorted by fear, anger, and fanaticism. They screamed, cursed, holding torches, clubs, and anything that could be used as a weapon. They needed a demon to unleash their rage upon, and Gideon had given them one. In the middle of the crowd, tied to a wooden post, was Arlo. His clothes were torn, his face bruised and swollen after a night of torture. The gag had been removed, but he could only make desperate, choked sounds, lost amidst the roar of the crowd. Gideon stood on a makeshift platform of wooden barrels, looking imposing like a judge. He pointed at Arlo. This, he shouted, his voice echoing across the square, drowning out the crowd's noise. This is the demon who has haunted our town. This is the one who killed Samuel, who killed innocent people. We found him in the warehouse last night, along with his disgusting drawings of the victims. He has confessed. A man in the crowd yelled, confessed? He's mute. How could he confess? Gideon laughed. A cold, chilling laugh. His silence is his confession. He cannot deny it. Do you know what he did? He redrew his crimes to satisfy his sick depravity. This beast has lived among us for too long. He must be punished. Arlo's drawing, his accusation, had now been twisted into his own confession. The truth had been brutally distorted. Arlo shook his head frantically. Tears streamed down his bruised face. He looked into the crowd, trying to find a face with compassion, a glimmer of hope. He saw Sheriff Finn, standing at the edge of the crowd. But the sheriff just stood there, his hands hanging limp, his face showing helplessness against this uncontrollable rage. He saw Mrs. McGregor, the general store owner, but she had turned her face away, not daring to meet his eyes. No one believed him. No one stood up to defend him. He was utterly alone. The crowd roared like a hungry beast. Kill him. Hang him. Throw him into the lake. Those words were like knives stabbing him. Arlo looked up at Gideon. Gideon was looking back at him, a victorious, malicious smile on his lips. He had succeeded. He had turned Arlo from a witness into a culprit. He had used Arlo's own silence, his only weapon, to condemn him. The crowd surged forward, their patience gone. They untied Arlo from the post. They dragged him across the ground, towards the lake. Arlo no longer resisted. His body and spirit were completely broken. He was just an empty shell, being dragged by a river of hatred. The twilight sky in Morning Vale was blood red, as if it too was witnessing and abhorring the crime about to take place. The barbaric crowd dragged Arlo to the lake's edge. They were no longer human. They were a pack of wild beasts, and Arlo was their prey. They beat him with clubs, threw stones at him, unleashing all their fear and anger onto his frail body. Arlo lay slumped on the ground, covered in blood. His body not a single uninjured spot. But strangely, he no longer felt pain. He only felt an endless coldness. A coldness spreading from the damp ground, seeping into his body. Gideon stepped forward, his figure blocking out the red sky. He held a large stone, the kind used to anchor boats. "Let the lake judge you," Gideon said, his voice ringing out like a sentence. "Let it cleanse your sins." A few strong men carried the stone over, and with an old, rotting rope, tied it to Arlo's leg. Then, they lifted him up. For a moment, Arlo hung suspended between sky and earth. He saw the distorted faces of the crowd, faces filled with cruel satisfaction. He saw Gideon, standing there like a king, a victor. They had taken everything from him. His voice, his freedom, and now his life. They threw him into the icy water. Splash! A loud sound echoed, and then all was silent. Arlo sank very quickly. The freezing water enveloped him. A deadly embrace. His chest ached from lack of air. But he did not struggle. He did not fight. He accepted his fate. And he opened his eyes. Beneath the strangely clear water, he could see everything with terrifying clarity. He saw the distorted faces of the crowd on the shore, looking down with satisfaction. He saw Gideon, standing there, his shadow stretching across the water. He saw the entire world that had turned its back on him. They had taken everything from him. But there was one thing they could not take. That was the truth. As the air in his lungs ran out, as darkness began to envelop his consciousness, Arlo did not close his eyes. He opened his eyes wide, staring fixedly upward, looking through the water, imprinting the image of every person who had condemned him, every face that had cheered his death. His eyes became a silent curse, a vow of revenge that would never fade, a vow that would be carved into the very heart of this lake, the eye of the unjustly dead. On the shore, the crowd gradually dispersed, carrying with them the morbid satisfaction that justice had been served. The lake's surface returned to its stillness, as if nothing had ever happened. But beneath those waters, in the silence and coldness of the lake bed, a fuel for revenge, nourished by extreme injustice and suffocated by silence, began to form. The eye of the lake, long closed, had now opened, and it was watching. Mila's apartment was on the top floor of an old apartment building, nestled in a noisy corner of the city. Outside the window, urban life never stopped. Car horns, laughter, pulsating music from the bars below. But inside, Mila's space was a completely different world. It was a realm of silence and forgotten stories. The walls were covered by bookshelves reaching the ceiling, sagging under the weight of hundreds of old books, carefully bound documents, and thick stacks of manuscripts. On the desk, two large computer monitors glowed, displaying digitized documents, antique maps, and yellowed newspaper articles. The air in the room smelled faintly of old paper, printing ink, and strong coffee. This was not just an apartment, it was a sanctuary, an archive of the whispers of the past. Mila sat in her sanctuary, back straight, eyes focused on the screen. The dim blue light illuminated her delicate face, highlighting her intense concentration and something melancholic, distant in her eyes. Her long black hair was tied up in a loose bun, a few strands falling around her temples. She wore a loose sweater, and when she reached for her coffee cup, the cuff slid down, revealing a small, intricate tattoo just above her wrist. It was the image of an open circle, a broken ring of air, the symbol of a breath cut short. She was working on her thesis, an ambitious project titled The Legacy of Silence, Mob Violence and the Formation of Suppressed Legends in Rural America. Mila wasn't just interested in legends of ghosts or monsters. She was obsessed with their origins. She believed that behind every ghost story, every curse, was a real human tragedy, an injustice buried, a scream suppressed, and that scream, when unable to escape, had turned into a whisper, a rumor, a ghost haunting that land for generations. Her work was an archaeological excavation of pain. She turned page after page of documents, reading faded words, trying to find cracks in official narratives, contradictions, overlooked details. She searched for ghosts in history. Tonight, she was following a vague lead, a footnote in an academic article from the 1980s about forms of superstition. The footnote was brief. A particularly noteworthy case is the Silence of Morning Vale, unofficial source, a local variation of the vengeful spirit motif. The legend tells of a lake cursed by the spirit of an unjustly executed man. Interestingly, unlike other legends, the entity here is said to be shapeless and voiceless, manifesting only through silent acts of violence. Due to the isolated nature and hostility of the local population, very little field research has been conducted. The Silence of Morning Vale. The phrase clung to Mila's mind like a hook. Silent violence. Voiceless. It was almost a perfect summary for her entire thesis. Her heart beat a little faster. She had a feeling she had just found a gold mine. A mute ghost. A literally suppressed story. Mila sat up straight. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, beginning a new hunt. She typed Morning Vale into academic archives, old newspaper databases, and even the dustiest, hidden corners of the internet. The excavation had begun. Morning Vale was not an easy place to find. It was too small, too isolated, leaving almost no trace in the vast digital world. But Mila was a persistent researcher. She was like a hunter, able to track the faintest of trails. She searched state archives, university collections, forums for local history enthusiasts, and gradually, fragments of the story began to emerge. Document number 1, source, State Newspaper Archive. Document name, The Morning Vale Chronicle, October 12, 1959 edition. Format, PDF scan of a yellowed, faded article. Morning Vale beast punished. Community breathes sigh of relief. Morning Vale, today. Our small and peaceful town can finally sleep soundly. The demon in human form, who has sown terror and death for the past 6 months, has paid for his crimes. The suspect, identified as Arlo, a mute vagrant, was apprehended last night after a determined investigation conducted by brave citizens of the town, led by the esteemed businessman, Mr. Gideon. Undeniable evidence, including sick drawings of victims found at his residence, proved the culprit's guilt. Before the outrage of the entire community, justice was swiftly and decisively carried out this afternoon. The killer's body was handed over to the deep lake to wash away the sins he had committed against this land. Sheriff Finn confirmed the incident and declared the case officially closed. The mayor extended deep gratitude to Mr. Gideon and other courageous citizens who stood up to protect the peace of Morning Vale. Now, our town can begin to heal its wounds and look towards a brighter future. Mila read the article again and again. Its language was self-satisfied, celebratory, yet it sent shivers down her spine. Brave citizens. Justice swiftly carried out. This wasn't the language of a newspaper article, it was the language of propaganda. An attempt to cover something up. To cover up a lynching. And that detail. Mute vagrant. A suspect who couldn't defend himself. A perfect scapegoat. Mila saved the document, naming the file Official Truth. She knew that the real truth often lay in what wasn't written. Document number 2. Source, State University Thesis Archive. Document name, Justice of the Axe and the Noose, Forms of Extralegal Punishment in Appalachia, Master's Thesis in Anthropology by Jonathan Crane. 1978. Format, Word document converted from original. Chapter 4, Modern Lynchings, the Case of Morning Vale. Although lynchings are often thought to have ended in the early 20th century, their forms persist in isolated communities where human law is easily replaced by mob rule. A typical, though little known, case is the Morning Vale Beast incident in 1959. According to the scarce official documents, a mute man named Arlo was executed by the townspeople for allegedly being the perpetrator of a series of murders. However, upon closer examination, this incident reveals many suspicious points. First, the speed of the trial. The suspect was arrested at night and executed the following afternoon. No trial. No lawyer. No opportunity to defend himself. This was clearly a legalized murder in the name of community justice. Second, the role of Gideon, an influential sawmill owner. Documents praised him as a hero, but unofficial interviews with a few residents, who requested anonymity, painted a different picture. Gideon was described as autocratic, cruel. It is noteworthy that after Arlo's death, Gideon's business empire expanded rapidly. Some of the previous victims were reportedly in business conflicts with him. Third, and most alarming, is the silence. After the execution, a strange curtain of silence fell over Morning Vale. Anyone who tried to ask questions was ostracized or threatened by the community. Arlo's death not only ended a series of murders, it also ended all dissent in town. Arlo may not have been the culprit, but a warning. A sacrifice to consolidate power for another. Mila felt a current run down her spine. This was it. The first crack in the official narrative. Jonathan Crane, a master's student in the 70s, had seen what she was seeing. Arlo was not a monster. He was a victim. She felt a strange connection to Arlo. A man stripped of his voice, condemned by his own silence. She unconsciously reached up and touched the tattoo on her wrist. Document number 3, source, Folklore of the Forgotten Collection, National Sound Archive. Document name, interview with Mrs. Agnes Reed, 82 years old, Morning Vale resident. Interviewer, Dr. Eleanor Vance. Recorded on June 22, 1994. Format, MP3 audio file and transcript. Crackling of a fireplace. Voice of an elderly woman. Trembling and whispering. Mrs. Agnes, no. We don't talk about that. The old ones are all gone. The new ones don't know. Better to let it lie. Dr. Vance, Mrs. Reed. Any information is very valuable. People say the town's lake is haunted. Do you know anything about that? Mrs. Agnes, long silence. It's not a ghost. Ghosts have shapes. And they cry. The thing in the lake. It has nothing. It's just silence. A cold silence. I still remember the day they did that to Arlo. I was just a little girl, hiding behind the window, looking out. I saw them throw him in. Dr. Vance, do you think it was Arlo's spirit? Mrs. Agnes, I don't know. I just know that after that day, the lake changed. The water was still clear, but it had a look like an eye. People called it the eye of the unjustly dead. The children in the village never dared go near it again. There were some who didn't believe. Outsiders. They swam. They camped. Then they got sick. Or they had accidents. Or they just disappeared. Dr. Vance, what about Gideon? Mrs. Agnes takes a deep, panicked breath. Shh, don't mention that name. He's been dead a long time. But the walls here still have ears. He brought the curse to this land. He turned Arlo into something terrifying. A shadow that never fades. A curse that never ends. Please, don't ask me anymore. I've said too much already. The recording ended with a sudden clack. Mila sat motionless, listening to the hiss of the blank tape. Mrs. Agnes's trembling voice still echoed in her head. It's not a ghost. It's just silence. It has a look. This was no longer just a mere academic study. It had become a horror story. A story that was slowly coming alive. Arlo had not disappeared. He had become the lake. Injustice had turned him into an entity. A curse. Mila opened a new Word file. She needed to organize her thoughts. Document number 4. Source, Mila's personal computer. Document name, Research Notes, Morning Vale. Format, Word document. Topic, Morning Vale, From Tragedy to Legend. Timeline, 1959, a series of murders occur. A mute man named Arlo is unjustly executed by a mob led by Gideon. After 1959, Gideon consolidates power. A curtain of silence falls over the town. Anyone questioning Arlo's case is suppressed. 1970s, the legend of the Eye of the Unjustly Dead begins to be recorded by outside researchers. The lake is believed to be haunted. But not by a conventional ghost, but by a hostile silence. 1990s to present, the story becomes a forgotten local legend, known only to the elderly. The town remains isolated. Analysis, this is a classic case of the mythologization of collective trauma. Repressed guilt, the people of Morning Vale, whether actively or silently complicit, participated in the death of an innocent man. This guilt cannot be acknowledged. So it is repressed and projected outward. The lake becomes the vessel for the town's guilt. Personification of fear, the fear of revenge, from Arlo's spirit, and the fear of Gideon's power merge, creating a supernatural entity. The silence of the lake is both Arlo's silence, unable to defend himself, and the silence Gideon imposed on the town. No one dares to speak the truth. Who is Arlo? He is not just a victim. He is a symbol. A symbol for suppressed voices. For buried truths. His spirit does not seek revenge in a conventional way. Because he never had a voice. Instead, it acts. Silent violence. Questions to answer. What was the true nature of the original murders? Was it Gideon who caused them to eliminate rivals? And Arlo merely witnessed? What role does the iron hook, mentioned in some unofficial accounts, need to find more sources, play? Was it the actual murder weapon? What will happen if the silence is broken? If someone goes there and intentionally seeks the truth? Mila stopped typing. The last question lingered in her mind. What would happen if someone went there? It was no longer an academic question. It was an invitation, a challenge. Mila knew she had enough material for an excellent thesis chapter. She could stop here, analyze the documents, present convincing hypotheses, and get an A, but that wasn't enough. Arlo's story had transcended the scope of a study. It had taken root in her mind. She felt she owed Arlo, owed all the silent souls she had researched, something more than an analytical paper. She owed them a truth brought to light. She returned to Jonathan Crane's archive, the author of the 1978 thesis. She scrolled through the attachments, blurry photos, handwritten notes. And then she saw it. An image file named map_sketch.jpg. She clicked on it. The image that appeared was a crude hand-drawn map of Morning Vale and the lake area. It was drawn on a napkin, perhaps during a hurried interview. Most of the details were illegible, but a spot on the northern shore of the lake was circled in red ink. Next to the circle was a scribbled handwritten note. Mila zoomed in on the image, squinting to read. Where they threw him in. Agnes said there was an iron box. Gideon threw it in at the same time. She thinks it was evidence, an iron box. Evidence. Mila's heart seemed to stop for a second, then pounded back with furious speed. This was it. This was not just a legend. There was a physical object. A secret that could literally be unearthed. A truth lying at the bottom of the lake, waiting for over 60 years. All her hesitation vanished. She couldn't just write about this story from afar. She had to go there. She had to find that box. She had to break the silence of Morning Vale. With trembling hands, Mila reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts and stopped at a name. Jonas. Beside his name was a small anchor icon. Jonas was a professional diver. The only person in the world she completely trusted. The only one crazy enough to embark on a trip like this. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart, and pressed the call button. On the other end of the line, a familiar, deep voice answered. Mila? What's up? Why are you calling me at this hour? Mila looked out the window, at the brightly lit and noisy city, but in her mind, she only saw the image of a still, dark lake and a forgotten valley. Jonas, she said, her voice filled with determination. I have a trip for us. Are you interested in hunting for a cursed treasure? 3 days after the midnight call, Mila and Jonas sat facing each other in a familiar corner of the Daily Grind coffee shop. Outside, November drizzle cast a grey film over the city, but inside, the warm yellow lights and the clattering coffee grinder created a pleasant atmosphere. Jonas, with the tall, sturdy build of someone who spent most of his time outdoors and underwater, slowly stirred his black coffee. He had short dark hair, tanned skin, and deep blue eyes, clear as calm ocean water. But today, in those eyes, there was scrutiny, a professional caution. He looked at Mila over the rim of his cup, waiting. Mila, conversely, barely touched her latte. She leaned forward, hands resting on the open laptop on the table, her excitement and determination almost radiating as tangible energy. All right. Jonas spoke first, his voice deep and steady. I'm here. Now tell me the whole story of your cursed treasure hunt. And please, don't use that I'm about to make a groundbreaking discovery in anthropology tone anymore. Just get straight to the point. Mila smiled. She knew her brother. He hated beating around the bush. All right. Straight to the point, she said, turning the laptop towards him. On the screen were the documents she had collected, the yellowed newspaper article, Jonathan Crane's thesis page, the hand-drawn map. Look. Morning Vale. 1959. A series of murders. A mute man named Arlo unjustly executed. And a lake. Jonas squinted, scanning the documents. He read quickly, efficiently, just as he checked his diving equipment. He paused at the article praising Gideon and the hand-drawn map with iron box and evidence circled. A lynching, he murmured, his voice no longer joking. And you think the real culprit threw the evidence into the lake at the same time as disposing of the victim's body? Exactly. Mila nodded, relieved he had grasped the issue. It's not just a legend, Jonas. There's a real object down there. An iron box. It's been at the bottom of that lake for over 60 years. Can you imagine? It's the final piece of the puzzle. It could exonerate a dead man. Expose a real monster. It's the truth in a box. Jonas leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. His expression turned serious. He no longer saw it as an adventure story. He was looking at it as a field survey. All right. Suppose you're right, he said. Suppose there's a box down there. What do you want me to do? Dive down and retrieve it. Right? I know no one can do it better than you. Jonas shook his head, a skeptical half smile on his lips. Mila, you're talking about a mountain lake, in the middle of nowhere, never surveyed. Do you know what it's like to dive in places like that? Do you know what you're asking? He began to list, counting on his fingers, his voice that of an expert analyzing risks. First, altitude. Diving in the mountains is completely different from diving in the sea. Air pressure is different. Decompression tables are different. A small mistake can lead to decompression sickness. Second, temperature. November. Mountain lake. The water will be freezing cold. We need specialized dry suits, not those touristy wetsuits. Third, visibility. You said the lake water was clear, but that's an old woman's account from decades ago. It could be full of mud, sediment. Visibility could be zero. Fumbling in darkness and mud in an unfamiliar place is the quickest way to commit suicide. He paused, taking a large sip of coffee, letting his words sink into Mila. And that's just the technical issues, he continued. What about legal issues? It could be private property, or a potential crime scene. We can't just dive down and retrieve things. And what about the locals? You said they're hostile. What will they do when they see two strangers from the city, carrying a bunch of diving equipment and starting to dig up their past? Mila listened in silence. She knew he wasn't trying to discourage her. He was doing the job of a brother, a protector. He was pointing out all the tangible monsters on the map, before they had to face the invisible monster in the legend. I know, she said softly after he finished. I know all of that. I've thought about it. But Jonas, look at the other side of the issue. She pointed to the laptop screen again. This isn't an impulsive trip. This is an opportunity. An opportunity to do something right. A man named Arlo was robbed of his life and his voice. An entire town has been poisoned by a lie for decades. We can change that. Not as anthropologists. Not as divers. But as two human beings. We can give them back the truth. Her voice was full of passion. And this time, it reached Jonas. He looked into his sister's eyes, seeing the sincerity and the fire of justice burning there. He knew that fire. He had seen it many times. Ever since Mila was a little girl. Always siding with the underdog on the playground. And it's also very important to you, isn't it? He asked, his voice softer. Mila nodded. She didn't hide it. It's central to everything I'm researching. My thesis. My career. But it's more than that. I feel like I owe him. Oh Arlo. She unconsciously raised her hand to the tattoo on her wrist. Jonas looked at it too. He knew the story behind that tattoo. A story they rarely spoke of. A childhood accident. A moment Mila had almost stopped breathing. A moment that had forever etched into her a fear and empathy for those suffocated, deprived of breath, deprived of voice. Don't do that, Mila, Jonas said softly. Don't make this personal. But it is personal, Jonas, she replied. For Arlo, it was personal. For the people deceived by Gideon, it was personal. Why can't it be personal for us? The air in the coffee shop seemed to cease to exist. Only the two siblings remained in their own world. In a conversation not just with words, but with memories and deep understanding, Jonas sighed. A long, heavy sigh. The breath of someone who knew he was about to lose a battle he never wanted to win in the first place. He knew his sister. Once Mila was determined. Nothing could stop her. And if he didn't go with her, she would find another way. She would go alone. Or with someone less experienced. Less caring to protect her. And that was a risk he could never accept. He was her protector. That had always been his role. All right. He finally said. Damn it. All right. I'll go with you. Mila's face lit up. A radiant smile appeared on her lips. Really? I knew you would, but... Jonas interrupted, raising a finger. His expression becoming absolutely serious. We do this my way. No arguments. No reckless actions. I'm the expedition leader. I'm responsible for all safety matters. My word is law. Understood? Understood. Mila nodded vigorously. Obedient as a child. Good, Jonas said. Grabbing a napkin and a pen, he began to write. We need a concrete plan. Dry suits. Spare air tanks. High-intensity flashlights. Safety lines. An underwater lockpicking kit. And we can't go with just 2 people. Too dangerous. If something happens to me underwater, you won't be able to do anything. We need at least one more person. An experienced support diver. He stopped writing and looked up. I'll call Matt. He's the best. He's also a bit crazy. He'll probably like these ghost stories. Matt? Mila asked. Your friend who live streams? That's right. Live streams but is an excellent diver. And we also need someone on shore to handle logistics and communication. You can invite your friends. But they have to be trustworthy. Not those city friends who just complain. We need tough people. Jonas had fully embodied his role. He was no longer the skeptical brother. He had become an explorer planning a mission. His professionalism had taken over. Mila looked at him, filled with a sense of gratitude and reassurance. She knew she had done the right thing by coming to him. I'll call Corey and Nadia, she said. They're great. Corey is sensitive, but very strong. Nadia is extremely rational and calm. They'll be a perfect addition. Good. Jonas nodded. So, next step, assemble the team. We'll have a meeting. Everyone. Coffee. Talk. To see if we can work together. And for me to see if your friends are really as tough as you say. He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. The negotiation was over. The promise had been made. The trip to Morning Vale was no longer a crazy idea in Mila's head. It had begun to take shape. The wheels of fate had begun to turn, leading a group of unsuspecting young people straight towards a silent lake and a silent curse that had been waiting for them for over 60 years. The large table in the corner of the room was a small island of silence and anticipation amidst the noisy ocean of the coffee shop. 5 people. 5 completely different energies. Were converging. Jonas, as usual, was the earliest to arrive. He sat upright, his black coffee neatly in front of him, his eyes observing everything with the calmness of someone accustomed to assessing situations. He was the rock, the anchor of the group. Across from him was Matt, a complete opposite. Matt couldn't sit still. He constantly fiddled with his phone, checked notifications, then looked around the cafe with the bright eyes of a child in a toy store. With his bleached platinum hair and complex graphic hoodie, Matt looked more like a gaming streamer than a professional diver. But Jonas knew. Behind that hyperactive exterior was one of the calmest and most adaptable divers he had ever met. Mila sat next to her brother, her laptop open, like a lawyer preparing for an important trial. She was the fire. The initiator. Her eyes constantly darted towards the door, waiting for the other two, and then they walked in. Corey and Nadia were like day and night. Corey, with her curly chestnut hair and a flowy boho dress, carried a warm and dreamy aura. She was an artist. Someone who saw the world through the lens of emotion and beauty. She smiled at everyone. A genuine and endearing smile. Walking right behind her was Nadia. Tall, slender, with short bob-cut black hair and metal-rimmed glasses. Nadia exuded intelligence, sharpness, and a slight aloofness. She was a medical student. Someone who believed in science, data, and what could be proven. Her gaze behind her glasses was very keen, as if analyzing and diagnosing everything. Everyone around her. "Sorry we're late," Corey said, her voice clear. Nadia's lecture ran longer than expected. "My professor believes pathology is a topic that should never end," Nadia added, her voice carrying a dry, characteristic sarcasm. She sat down, neatly placed her bag beside her, and looked directly at Mila. "All right, Mila, we're here. You've assembled this Avengers team. So, what's with the big mystery?" Mila took a deep breath. Here it was. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice serious enough to make even Matt look up from his phone. "What I'm about to tell you might sound incredible, but I hope you'll listen with an open mind." And then, she began to tell. She told the story of Morning Vale, of the Forgotten Valley. She told of Arlo, the mute man framed and killed. She told of Gideon, the demon in human form. She told of the eye of the unjustly dead and the curse of a hateful silence. She didn't just present facts. She was painting a tragic picture. Her voice was full of emotion, full of empathy for the man who had been stripped of everything. As she spoke, the entire table seemed enveloped in a different space, separate from the cafe's noise. Mila's voice had transported them to a small, dark town in the 1950s. When she finished her presentation, a silence fell. Matt was the first to break it. He let out a low whistle. "Whoa. A cover-up murder. A curse. A haunted treasure. Mila, this isn't a thesis. This is an Oscar-winning horror movie script. I'm in. What do you think, Jonas? We can attach GoPros to our dive helmets. Live stream the entire box retrieval. Divers vs. Ancient Curse. My channel will blow up." Corey, on the other hand, didn't seem excited. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "That's terrible," she whispered. "Poor man. Alone against the whole town. No one believed him, just because he couldn't speak." She looked at Mila, her eyes full of understanding. "I understand why this is important to you. Mila, we have to do something. We have to speak for him." Jonas nodded, pleased with Matt and Corey's reactions. One to handle technical and filming. One to handle spiritual motivation. Good. Now for the biggest challenge. He looked at Nadia. Nadia said nothing. She simply took off her glasses, slowly and carefully cleaning them with a small cloth, an action that showed she was thinking deeply. After putting her glasses back on, she looked directly at Mila. "Mila, I love you," she began, her voice calm and clear. "But what are you basing this on?" An old propaganda-style newspaper article. A master's thesis from '78. The account of an elderly woman who might be confused. And a map drawn on a napkin? She crossed her arms, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. "You're proposing that we drive hundreds of miles to a remote place, possibly full of unfriendly locals, to dive into an unexplored, freezing, dangerous lake, to find an iron box that may or may not exist, based on a rumor recorded on a napkin? Do you hear yourself? Medically, I'd call that a temporary psychotic episode due to thesis burnout. Corey frowned. Nadia, how can you say that? I'm being realistic. Nadia replied, not taking her eyes off Mila. Jonas, you're an expert. Be honest. What are the odds of success for a dive like this? And what are the odds of someone getting hurt? Or worse? All eyes turned to Jonas. He didn't flinch at Nadia's direct question. On the contrary, he seemed to respect her skepticism. Success depends on preparation, he said professionally. And our preparation will be absolute. We'll have the best equipment. Matt and I are both certified rescue divers. We'll have plans A, B and C for every situation. Technically, I can minimize the risks as much as possible. He looked at Nadia. But you're right. The biggest risk isn't underwater. It's on shore. That's why we need a team. Matt and I underwater. Mila coordinating research. Corey. He turned to her. We need your sensitivity to gauge the situation. To deal with the locals if necessary. And Nadia. He looked directly at her. We need you. We need someone to keep everyone's feet on the ground. We need someone to ask the hard questions. We need someone to handle medical. We need your skepticism to keep us safe. It was a smart move. Jonas didn't try to refute Nadia's skepticism. He turned it into a role. A valuable asset to the team. Nadia seemed a little surprised. She was silent for a moment. Even so, she said, her voice less sharp. It's still too big a gamble. Based on too little evidence. At this point, Mila spoke up. Her voice deep and personal. Nadia, you ask what I'm basing this on. I'm basing it on a feeling. She looked directly into her friend's eyes. I've spent my whole life reading about people being suppressed. People being deprived of their voices. And this story, it's different. It calls to me. I know it sounds crazy. But I feel like if we don't go, if we don't try, no one else will. And Arlo will be forever trapped in that silence. That box is his only chance to be heard. We can be his voice. She paused. Then continued. Her voice almost a whisper. I know it's dangerous. And I would never ask you all to do this if I didn't believe we could do it. And I can't do it without you. All of you. The atmosphere at the table thickened again. Nadia looked at Mila. Then at a worried Corey. At a nodding Matt. And finally at Jonas, who was looking at her with absolute trust. She saw Mila's passion. Corey's loyalty. Matt's enthusiasm. And Jonas's professionalism. She saw a team. A team that might be a little crazy. But a complete team. She sighed. A sigh of surrender. Damn it. She muttered. Repeating the exact phrase Jonas had said a few days earlier. All right. I'm in. Mila and Corey almost cheered. But Nadia raised her hand, cutting off their joy. I have conditions. First, Jonas has full authority on all safety matters. No one argues. Second, I will prepare a complete emergency first aid kit. And if anyone gets even a small scratch and doesn't report it to me, I will personally drag them back. And third, she looked at the group with a strict gaze. If I hear anyone say things like I have a bad feeling or the spirits are angry, I will personally sedate that person and drive them straight back to the city. We're going there for historical truth, not ghost hunting. Understood? The whole group laughed. The tension dissipated. Understood, Doctor, Matt said, saluting. Excellent, Mila said, her eyes sparkling with joy and gratitude. The team was formed. 5 completely different individuals, connected by friendship, trust, and a common goal. They raised their coffee cups together for Arlo, Corey said softly. For the truth. Mila added. For a 1,000,000-view livestream. Matt enthusiastically exclaimed. For keeping you idiots alive, Nadia mumbled. For all of that, Jonas concluded. And they clinked glasses. The clinking of ceramic cups was a small sound, lost amidst the cafe's bustle. But for them, it was a pledge. A pact made. A pact that would lead them straight into the heart of a morning land, facing a silent curse that had slept for too long. As they continued to discuss their plan, Mila suddenly felt a shiver run down her spine. A sudden coldness unrelated to the weather outside. She looked at her friends, their dear faces laughing and talking, and a vague sense of unease crept into her heart. She didn't know that, far away, in a fog-shrouded valley, an eye at the bottom of the lake seemed to have just stirred. It had sensed them, and it was waiting. The city at 5 in the morning was a completely different entity. It was no longer the noisy, hurried monster of the daytime, but a sleeping giant, its breath steady and deep. The wide roads were empty, deserted under the orange streetlights. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp concrete after a night and a promise of a new day. Jonas's black Ford Everest was the only bright spot of activity on Mila's quiet street. The engine purred softly, headlights casting a long beam onto the empty road. Jonas had been there for 15 minutes, walking around the car, checking the roof rack straps one last time. On top, specialized toolboxes, air tanks, and diving equipment were securely fastened as if part of the vehicle. He was a man who never left room for chance. Inside the car, Matt had already claimed the passenger seat, not to help Jonas, but to set up his mobile command center. He was fumbling with a mess of charging cables, tablets, and a gimbal with a phone attached. Okay. Mic check. 1 2 3 4. Matt muttered into the small microphone clipped to his collar. Audio's good. Front cam. Rear cam. Wide-angle cam check. Everything's locked and loaded. Ready for the journey to the Curse series. Let's go. Jonas glanced at him over his shoulder. A slight shake of the head but said nothing. He was used to Matt's slightly excessive enthusiasm. As long as he maintained his professionalism underwater, he could do whatever he wanted on land. Just then, the main door of the apartment complex opened. Mila, Corey, and Nadia stepped out, each pulling a suitcase and carrying a large backpack. Their arrival was like three completely different musical notes sounding simultaneously. Mila, as always, looked focused and efficient. She wore jeans, a hoodie, and hiking boots. Her backpack looked heavy, surely filled with more books and research materials than clothes. She went straight to Jonas. Good morning, big brother. Everything okay? Fine. I've checked everything twice. Put your stuff in the trunk. There's still plenty of space. Corey, on the other hand, looked like an autumn muse just stepped out of a painting. She wore a long cream-colored knit dress, layered with a knitted cardigan, and a brown beret. She wasn't pulling a suitcase, but hugging a large canvas bag and a foldable easel. She took a deep breath of the morning air. Oh my gosh, the air is so fresh, she exclaimed. Waking up this early in the city is truly a different experience. I feel like today's going to be a very healing day. Nadia, walking last, was the embodiment of brutal practicality. She wore a black tracksuit, neat and practical. Her suitcase looked more like a giant medical kit than a travel suitcase. Her eyes behind her glasses were slightly tired. Healing or not, I don't know. She yawned. I just know I need coffee. Extra strong. Otherwise, my vibe today will be lemon all day long. Matt poked his head out of the car window. Hey ladies. Get in quickly. The sun's about to rise. I need to shoot some golden hour shots. It'll look amazing on camera. Nadia gave Matt a sharp look. If you point that camera at my face before I've had my coffee, I promise you'll have problems with me. After a few minutes of loading luggage and settling in, everyone was finally in the car. Jonas was behind the wheel. Mila sat beside him, acting as navigator. The second row was the girls' domain. Corey sat by the window to enjoy the scenery. Nadia sat in the middle to easily fall asleep. And Matt had moved to the very back row to have space to work for his vlog channel. The car rolled away, leaving the familiar street, merging into the flow of larger roads that were gradually waking up. The journey to Morning Vale had officially begun. The first part of the trip passed in a fairly light-hearted atmosphere. Jonas focused on driving, while the four young people in the back quickly turned the SUV into a mobile common room. After stopping at a gas station with a convenience store and Nadia had her large Americano, the conversation began to get lively. Hey, did you guys watch that flex video of Influencer X's designer bag collection yesterday? Corey initiated, scrolling on her phone. Oh my god. She even has a white alligator Birkin. It's giving me slight psychological trauma. Nadia took a sip of coffee, not looking up from her pathology textbook. I'd rather use that money to buy a handheld ultrasound machine. Much more useful. Matt, from the back seat, pointed his camera at them. Gen Z perspective right here. One side is healing with fashion, the other is practical with medicine. What do you all think about flexing culture on social media? Let Matt know in the comments below. Turn that camera off, Matt. Nadia and Mila said in unison. Okay. Calm down. Matt lowered the camera. Just warming up. But seriously, I think flexing is fine, as long as it's something you earned. Like me. When I get new diving gear at the end of the month, I have to flex it right away to impress everyone. You call that flexing? Jonas interjected from the driver's seat, his eyes still straight ahead. I call that showing off, and it's a bit annoying. Wow. Jonas is so right. Corey nodded in agreement. But I agree. Scrolling through social media these days is exhausting. It's all drama. Yesterday I watched a call out on a green tea, other woman. Oh my god. The plot twists were like a Thai drama. You should just skim those things. Don't get too invested. Nadia advised. Our brains have limited capacity, so use it for more beneficial things, like distinguishing between appendicitis and stomach pain. For example, you're always on medical operating system mode, Corey teased. But I admit, I've been feeling a bit overloaded with information lately. I'm practicing digital detox now. Only scroll on my phone for an hour a day. 1 hour? Matt exclaimed. 1 hour, and I haven't even finished replying to my fans' comments yet. You're such a boomer. Their conversation jumped from topic to topic naturally, from a new Korean drama, a newly opened cafe with an amazing photo op spot, to debating whether black sugar boba milk tea or mangosteen tea was better. Mila barely participated in these conversations. She wore headphones, but didn't play music. She just wanted to create her own space, focusing on her Morning Vale notes on her phone. She occasionally smiled when she heard her friends teasing each other, but her mind was far away. She was thinking about Arlo, about Gideon, about the iron box lying at the bottom of the lake. She felt a slight detachment from her friends. They were going somewhere dangerous, but to them, it was still an adventure, a road trip. Only she and Jonas understood its true weight. Hey Mila. Corey suddenly turned, pulling one of her headphones off. Are you CHAMZN, stressed/quiet, again? You haven't said a word. Mila started, Oh. Nothing. I was just reviewing some notes. Come on, girl, Nadia said. We know you're worried. But relax a little. It's still a long way to go. If you're stressed like a violin string, you'll run out of energy when we get there. Mila looked at her friends. Nadia was looking at her with a serious but caring gaze. Corey smiled encouragingly. Matt had also turned off his camera, looking at her with empathy. Thank you, guys, Mila said, a genuine smile appearing on her lips. I'm fine. She put her phone away. Maybe Nadia was right. She needed to relax. The real battle was still ahead. So, mangosteen tea? She asked. I think it's just okay. There, Matt exclaimed. The debate has erupted. Nadia, check the nutritional content of both for me. Let's see which side is more scientific. The car was filled with laughter and debate again. And in that moment, they were simply 5 young friends on a journey. And the darkness of Morning Vale seemed to recede. If only temporarily. When the car had been driving for about 3 hours, the scenery outside began to change noticeably. Tall buildings, industrial zones, and colorful billboards receded, giving way to sprawling rice fields, small red-tiled houses, and roads with less traffic. The air no longer smelled of dust and smoke, but instead of earth, vegetation, and a slower pace of life. The change in scenery also seemed to affect the mood and conversation inside the car. The small talk about showbiz and bubble tea subsided. Matt was the first to bring up the main topic again. He was reviewing the footage he had just shot on his laptop. It's true. Going from the city to the countryside, the vibe is completely different, he observed. The light is softer too. If I edit these shots and add some lo-fi chill music, it'll be perfect. I like the atmosphere here, Corey said, her eyes fixed on the window, as if wanting to absorb every image. It's so peaceful. Look at the mountains in the distance, like a watercolor painting. At least the air is cleaner here, Nadia said, putting away her book. Air pollution index is definitely much lower, but that also means medical facilities will be further away. The nearest hospital is probably an hour's drive from here. You always think about hospitals, Matt teased. That's my job. Prevention is better than cure, Nadia retorted. Mila, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly spoke up. It reminds me of what I read. Isolated towns like Morning Vale often develop a very specific mentality. They're self-sufficient. They have their own rules. And they're very wary of outsiders. Jonas nodded. That's what we need to be careful about. We're not going there as tourists. We're going there to dig up a secret they've tried to bury for over 60 years. We need to be very discreet and respectful. Discreet? Matt raised an eyebrow. How can an SUV carrying a bunch of specialized diving gear and 5 unfamiliar faces be discreet? Ma'am, my point is no unnecessary attention, Jonas explained. No cameras. No live streaming when we're in town. We'll go straight to the lake area, set up camp, and act like a normal camping group. The work will only happen underwater. Is that clear? Everyone clear? The whole group said in unison. Corey turned to Mila, her voice a little worried. Mila, you've read a lot about these things. Do you think there's really a curse? Corey's question brought a hush to the car. Even Matt stopped editing his video. Mila thought for a moment before answering. Scientifically, the curse people talk about in Morning Vale can be explained as a socio-psychological phenomenon, she said academically. It's the manifestation of collective guilt, of the fear of punishment. It's a mechanism to keep the secret safe. But, Corey continued, what about unscientifically? Mila looked out the window, where the mountains were drawing closer. darker and more menacing. I believe that when a person dies in extreme injustice, when a strong emotion like resentment, pain, and a desire for justice is repressed, it can leave an imprint, an echo, a source of negative energy clinging to the place where the tragedy occurred. It may not be a spirit as we commonly think, but it is something real, something that can affect those around it. A form of psychic energy? Matt asked, his eyes lighting up. That sounds lit. Like in The Grudge. Hatred creates an entity. I wouldn't call it psychic energy, Nadia interjected, her voice full of skepticism. I'd call it the nocebo effect. If people believe a place is cursed, they will automatically interpret any negative events that occur there as a result of the curse. They will become anxious, stressed, and that can lead to accidents or health problems. It's the power of self-fulfilling prophecy, not ghosts. So which one is right? Corey asked. Looking back and forth between Mila and Nadia, Jonas answered. Maybe both are right. Or both are wrong. We don't know. And that's not our job. Our job is to find the iron box. Let's focus on the tangible goal. Don't get distracted by things we can't prove. Jonas's words were like a bell, bringing everyone back to reality. He was right. They had a specific mission. Speculating about the nature of the curse only made them more confused. The car continued to roll, but the light-hearted, cheerful atmosphere from earlier had completely vanished. Instead, there was a contemplative silence. Each person was lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them ahead. They were driving into a land where the boundary between psychology and spirituality, between truth and legend, became as blurred as the mist that shrouded it. After almost an hour of driving on winding mountain roads, they finally saw it. An old wooden sign, weathered by rain and sun, stuck by the roadside. On it, hand-carved letters, almost completely faded. Welcome to Morning Vale. Drive carefully. We're here, Mila said softly, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. Jonas slowed down, letting the car slowly pass the sign. The moment the car passed that landmark, there seemed to be an inexplicable shift in the air. The cold seemed to sharpen, the sunlight seemed to weaken, and a heavy stillness began to press down, overriding the sound of the car's engine. The town of Morning Vale appeared in a small valley, nestled amidst four towering rock faces. It looked exactly as Mila had imagined, yet at the same time, vastly different. It didn't possess the simple, pristine beauty of the countryside they had just passed through. It held a melancholic beauty, frighteningly silent. Wooden houses stood still on either side of the main road, paint peeling, roofs covered in a layer of green moss. A few geranium pots were placed on the windowsills, but they only made the scene more desolate. There were no children playing, no sound of people talking. Occasionally, a face would appear behind a window curtain, staring at their car, then quickly vanish. This place has a strange vibe, Matt mumbled, having put away all his cameras. It's abnormally quiet, like in a horror movie, before the monster appears. I agree, Corey whispered, no longer looking eager to draw. It's not peace. It's emptiness. The population here must be very low, Nadia observed scientifically, but her voice also held a hint of tension. And most of them are elderly. I don't see anyone under 50. Jonas decided to stop at the town's only general store, a wooden house slightly larger than the others, with a general store sign hanging in front. We need to buy some more water and snacks, he said. But Mila knew the real reason was that he wanted to gauge the situation. Mila, you and Corey go inside. Try to strike up a natural conversation. Nadia, you and Matt stay in the car. Don't do anything to draw attention. Mila and Corey stepped out of the car. The cold immediately enveloped them. The air here was fresh, but it carried a heavy, suffocating feeling. The wooden door of the store creaked mournfully as they pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and smelled of old wood, dust, and something like dried lavender. Goods were stacked on wooden shelves, mostly canned food, candles, and essential items. Standing behind the counter was an elderly woman, perhaps over 80. Her hair was white as floss, neatly tied in a bun. She wore a faded floral apron. As they entered, she merely looked up at them for a second with dull, clouded eyes, then bent down again, continuing to arrange coins in the drawer. She didn't offer a greeting. Mila and Corey exchanged a worried glance. They took a few bottles of water and a bag of potato chips. When they brought them to the counter, Mila tried to start a conversation. "Hello, Mom," she said, her voice as friendly as possible. "The scenery here is beautiful." The old woman didn't answer immediately. She slowly tallied the bill, her thin, wrinkled fingers pressing the buttons on the antique cash register. "Strangers don't usually come here," she finally said, her voice dry and monotone, without any emotion. "Yes, we're on our way to camp in the mountain lake area," Corey said, trying to sound cheerful. "We heard it's very beautiful there." At the mention of lake area, the old woman's hand paused for a second. A minuscule change. But Mila noticed it. The old woman looked up. And this time, she looked directly into their eyes. Her dull eyes seemed to sharpen. "That lake is not a place for fun," she said, her voice now holding a cold warning. "It's a place for people to forget. You girls are young. You should find somewhere else to camp." With that, she bent down, took Mila's money, and gave her the change. She said no more, turning her back to them, starting to wipe down the counter. A clear sign that the conversation was over. Mila and Corey quickly left the store, feeling as if an invisible burden had just been placed on their shoulders. "Oh my God," Corey whispered once they were back in the car. She scared me so much." Her eyes. Mila said nothing. She just looked back at the wooden house. The old woman's warning didn't scare her. On the contrary, it strengthened her resolve. The old woman knew. This whole town knew. They were living with a secret, and they were afraid of anyone who might disturb it. "Let's go, brother," she said to Jonas. "We know we're on the right track." Jonas nodded. He started the car, leaving the eerie town, following a smaller dirt road leading up the mountain. The road to the lakeside. Chapter 17, The Still Lake Shore. After about 15 minutes of driving on the bumpy dirt road, through a dense and dark pine forest, they finally arrived. The road ended abruptly at a small clearing, and right in front of them, appearing amidst an arc of towering rock faces, was the lake. Everyone in the car fell silent. It was unlike any lake they had ever seen. It was perfectly beautiful, and perfectly terrifying. The lake's surface was as still as a black obsidian mirror, without a single ripple. It reflected the grey sky and the towering rock faces with eerie clarity, creating an illusion of an inverted world. A bottomless abyss. The lake water, as the stories said, was crystal clear. They could see large rocks at the bottom, fallen tree trunks lying still like the skeletons of long-dead monsters. Around the lake was an absolute silence. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as it approached the shore. This silence was heavy, oppressive, as if it had its own mass, pressing on their chests, making it difficult to breathe. They stepped out of the car. The cold here seemed denser, sharper than in town. It clung to their skin, seeping into their bones. Wow! Matt was the first to speak. But his voice was no longer enthusiastic. Just a soft exclamation. It's more than I imagined. It's so beautiful, Corey said. But there was a tremor in her voice. But I don't want to draw it. I feel like I shouldn't disturb this place. Nadia crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze sweeping everywhere, analyzing. High humidity. Temperature unusually low. About 5 to 7 degrees Celsius colder than the surrounding area. The absence of wildlife sounds is unusual. Perhaps there's some kind of natural gas escaping from the lake affecting the ecosystem. Even Nadia was trying to find a scientific explanation for the undeniable sense of unease that enveloped them. Mila said nothing. She just walked slowly towards the lake shore, as if pulled by an invisible force. She stood a few steps from the water's edge, staring at the lake's surface. It was staring back at her. She knew it sounded crazy, but she could feel it. This lake was not an inanimate object. It was an existence, a consciousness, a witness who had observed tragedy, absorbed pain, and waited. She felt a profound, vast sadness emanating from the water. Arlo's sadness. The sadness of a soul betrayed, suppressed, cast into the abyss of oblivion. Jonas walked up to stand beside her. He didn't look at the lake's surface, but at his sister. He saw the focus, the empathy, and even a hint of obsession in her eyes. "Do you feel it?" Mila asked softly, not taking her eyes off the water. "I feel the air here is very heavy," Jonas replied cautiously. "And we need to be extremely careful." He turned back to the group. "All right. Here's the plan. We'll set up camp in this clearing, a little distance from the lake shore. Build a campfire, cook, live normally. We need a day to adapt and observe. Tomorrow, weather permitting, Matt and I will do the first dive at noon, when there's the most light. From now until then, no one goes alone. And absolutely no one goes near the water's edge. Understood?" Everyone nodded. Jonas's firm words and clear plan were like a lifeline, helping them cling amidst a sea of unease. As they began to unload and set up tents, the sun began to set behind the mountains. Darkness descended on the valley quickly, like a giant black velvet curtain being lowered. The lake darkened, blending into the night, becoming invisible. But they all knew it was still there, silent, watching, and waiting. Sunrise in Morning Vale was not a spectacular event. It didn't paint vibrant colors across the sky. Instead, light simply filtered through the thick mist. A weak, diffused, silver-gray light, like the light in an abandoned church. It provided visibility, but no warmth. The first to wake, not surprisingly, was Jonas. The habits of someone working in dangerous environments were deeply ingrained in him. He slept lightly, always on alert. As he gently unzipped his tent, the cold immediately rushed in. It wasn't the normal cold of a mountain morning. It had a sharpness, a bone-chilling dampness. He stood upright, taking a deep breath. The air was fresh, but too quiet. Absolutely no sound. No birds chirping a morning song. No rustling leaves in the wind. Nothing at all. The silence here wasn't the absence of noise. It was a presence. An invisible sound wall surrounding their campsite. Jonas squinted towards the lake. The lake's surface remained as still as a black mirror. A thin layer of mist hovered above the water, making it appear even more mystical and distant. He had an uneasy feeling that the lake was watching him, and he didn't like that feeling. He turned back, starting his work. He checked the diving equipment once more. Every valve, every hose, every buckle. The repetition of familiar tasks, requiring absolute precision, helped calm his nerves. That was how he dealt with uncertainty, with meticulous preparation to the point of obsession. About half an hour later, Nadia and Corey's tent also stirred. Nadia was the first to emerge. Her hair slightly messy, but her eyes were awake and sharp as always. She wore specialized thermal clothing. "Good morning," she said to Jonas, her voice a little hoarse. "What's the outside temperature?" "About 4 degrees Celsius," Jonas replied, his eyes not leaving the pressure gauge. "But it feels like below zero." "High humidity," Nadia muttered, speaking more to herself than to Jonas. She looked around. The lack of wildlife activity is remarkable. "Do you hear anything?" "No. Nothing at all." "Abnormal," Nadia concluded. "It suggests a chronic stressor in this environment. Enough to repel or silence most animal species." Corey emerged immediately after, wrapped in a thick wool blanket like a caterpillar. She looked tired, her eyes slightly puffy. I didn't sleep well," she said, her voice sleepy. "I kept feeling like someone was walking around our tent all night." Nadia professionally placed her hand on her friend's forehead. "No fever. Maybe you're just not used to the place. Or it's my snoring." "You don't snore." Corey smiled weakly. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. Hard to describe. Just then, Matt crawled out of his tent, yawning widely. "Good morning, Vietnam," he yelled cheerfully, breaking the stillness. "Who wants breakfast with sunny side-up eggs and bacon made by Chef Matt here?" Jonas and Nadia both turned to look at him with dagger eyes. "Shh," Jonas signaled. "Keep quiet." "Why?" Matt asked, bewildered. "I was just trying to create a fun camping atmosphere." "The atmosphere here doesn't need your fun," Nadia said dryly. "It needs respect. Don't you see how strange this place is?" Matt looked around. And this time, he seemed to truly sense the silence. His usual boisterousness deflated a bit. It is kind of creepy. Actually, Mila was the last to emerge. She looked no less tired than Corey. She had dark circles under her eyes. "Did anyone get any sleep?" she asked. The group looked at each other and shook their heads. It seemed Morning Vale's curse wasn't just a story. It was a pressure, a weight pressing on their minds even in sleep. Breakfast took place in an awkward silence. Matt had tried to fry eggs and bacon, but it seemed no one was in the mood to eat. They just sat around the small gas stove, sipping hot coffee and trying not to look towards the lake. "All right," Jonas said after breakfast, his voice decisive, pulling everyone out of their vague thoughts. "Plan for today. We need to familiarize ourselves with this area. And we need firewood for tonight's campfire. A big fire will help us stay warm and is also an important psychological factor. We'll split into 2 groups. Matt, you go with me. We'll go deeper into the forest to find large dry branches. Mila, you, Corey, and Nadia are one group. You girls go along the edge of the forest nearby, collecting small branches and kindling. Always keep in touch with the walkie-talkies. Don't go too far from each other. Always keep an eye on each other. Understood?" Everyone nodded. Having a concrete task seemed to make them feel better. "Good. We have 2 hours. Then everyone meet back here," Jonas said, looking at his watch. "Start now." The 2 groups split up, heading in different directions, entering the eerily silent forest surrounding the lakeside. The forest surrounding the lakeside was unlike any forest they had ever known. The pine trees here were soaring, their trunks straight and dark, their canopy so dense that very little sunlight could penetrate. On the ground, A thick and damp layer of pine needles had accumulated over many years, making their every step almost silent. Mila's group, Corey and Nadia, walked along the edge of the forest, not far from the campsite. They carried large bags for collecting firewood. "This place makes me feel like I'm in a cathedral," Corey said softly, her voice sounding strangely in the stillness. "It's both solemn and a little sad." "It's not solemn," Nadia corrected, her eyes scanning the tree trunks. "It's an environment lacking biodiversity. Don't you see? Mostly just pine trees. Very few shrubs or other types of plants. The thick layer of pine needles on the ground has acidified the soil, preventing other species from growing. It's a very monotonous and closed ecosystem." "You can always find a scientific explanation for everything," Corey mumbled. But her voice wasn't teasing as usual, but held a hint of gratitude. Nadia's logic was like an anchor, keeping them from drifting in a sea of unease. Mila did not join their conversation. She was focused on observing. She noticed something strange. Many of the pine trees here had scars. Not natural scars from lightning strikes or broken branches. They were scratches, deep and parallel, as if made by a giant set of claws. "Hey, come here and look," she called to her two friends. They gathered around a large pine tree. On the trunk, at about Mila's eye level, were a series of 6 deep scratches, running vertically along the tree. The bark was torn open, revealing the white wood inside. Sap had oozed out and dried, looking like amber tears. "Probably a bear," Nadia said immediately. Black bears often claw trees to mark territory or sharpen their claws. "This is normal behavior." "But it looks vicious," Corey said, shivering. "And look, scratches up there. And on that tree too. It seems like every tree has them." Corey was right. As they looked closer, they realized that these scratches were everywhere, on most of the large trees around them. The entire forest seemed to be covered in signs of violence, of fury. "Perhaps this is the territory of a very large and very diligent bear marking its territory." Nadia still tried to maintain her logic, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. Mila knelt down, examining a scratch near the base of the tree. It was very deep, and the edges of the scratch were very clean. Not frayed at all. "It doesn't look like an animal scratch," Mila said softly. "Bear claws usually leave uneven scratches, and often have traces of fur or dirt stuck to them. These scratches, they're too neat, too sharp, as if they were made by metal." A sudden cold gust of wind blew through the forest, making all 3 girls shiver. Mila's words hung in the air. Metal. They involuntarily thought of the iron hook in Arlo's story. "Come on, Mila," Nadia said, her voice a little sharp, as if trying to reassure herself. "You're letting that story influence your reasoning. It's just a bear. We should collect firewood quickly and go back. I don't like it here." Corey and Mila agreed. They quickly began to pick up dry branches. But now, every time they saw a scratch on a tree, they felt a shiver run down their spine. The forest was no longer a quiet place. It had become a place filled with silent warnings. When their bags were almost full, Corey suddenly stopped. She was staring into a gap between 2 pine trees. "What is it?" Mila asked. I just saw something," Corey said, her voice trembling. "Just a shadow darting by." Very quickly, Nadia and Mila looked in the direction she was pointing. There were only tree trunks and shadows. "Probably just a squirrel or something," Nadia said. "The light here is very dim. It's easy to mistake things." "No," Corey insisted. "It was bigger than a squirrel. And it didn't have a clear shape. It was just A black blur. Mila's walkie-talkie crackled. Then Jonas's voice came through, startling all three of them. Alpha Team calling Sparrows. What's your status? Report. Mila raised the walkie-talkie to her mouth. Sparrows copy. Eagles. We've collected quite a bit of firewood. Everything's fine. We're about to head back. She had decided not to tell Jonas about the scratches or the shadow Corey saw. He had too much to worry about already. Copy that. We're heading back too. See you at rendezvous point. Copy. They quickly returned to the campsite. Their steps now much more hurried. They said nothing more. But all three shared the same feeling, they were not alone in this forest. Something was watching them from the shadows. Something without a clear shape. Something that had left deep scars on the tree bark. As night fell, their campsite was the only oasis of light and warmth amidst a sea of darkness and cold. Jonas and Matt had built a large campfire, the flames dancing, crackling, warding off the darkness and casting dancing shadows on the tents. The scent of pine smoke wafted through the air, a scent that should have been comforting. But in this place, it only heightened the sense of isolation. They sat huddled around the fire, each holding a cup of hot cocoa. After a simple dinner of pasta and sausages, the atmosphere had eased a bit. The fire had a strange calming power. I have to admit, Matt said, warming his hands over the flames. Nothing beats a campfire night in the wilderness. It feels so zen. Except this wilderness is eerily quiet and might want to kill us. Nadia interjected, but there was a hint of playful sarcasm in her voice. Don't be so pessimistic, Doc, Matt laughed. We have super-duper leader Jonas here. He'll handle anything. Jonas merely offered a faint smile. He was gazing into the flames, his mind seemingly elsewhere. Tonight, we need someone to stand guard, he said. We'll split into 2 shifts. I'll take the first shift with Nadia, from now until 2 a.m. Matt and Mila will take the second shift, from 2 a.m. until dawn. Corey, you just sleep. You look the most tired. Corey nodded appreciatively. To lighten the mood, Corey suggested, how about we tell stories? Like when we used to camp as kids. Ghost stories? Matt enthused. Awesome. I have a whole collection of ghost stories. How about one about a haunted doll in Japan? No. Please, Nadia said. We're in a creepy enough place as it is. No need for extra seasoning. How about a funny story instead? But I actually think ghost stories are good. Mila unexpectedly spoke up. Sometimes, facing a fictional fear can help us feel more in control of our real fears. There was a brief silence. Mila's words had hit the nail on the head. Real fears. All right, Jonas said. If that's what everyone wants. Matt, you go first. But keep it short. Matt cleared his throat, trying to create an air of mystery. All right. So, here's the story. Matt told a story about a hiker who got lost in the woods and found an abandoned cabin. A rather familiar motif. He tried to use a spooky tone, creating dramatic pauses. But his story wasn't as frightening as the silence of the forest that surrounded them. When he finished, only the crackling of the fire responded. It's decent, Nadia commented. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Needs improvement on the climax. Whose turn is it now? Matt asked. All eyes turned to Corey. I don't know how to tell ghost stories, she said softly. Then tell any story, Mila encouraged. A memory, for example. Corey looked into the fire. The firelight danced in her large, sensitive eyes. This isn't a ghost story, she began, her voice dropping. But it also has a fear. It's about my grandpa. The group listened in silence. My grandpa was a very kind, very quiet man. When I was little, I was very close to him. He had a small house in the countryside, with a large garden. But then, as he got older, he started to get confused. Alzheimer's. Corey's voice had a slight tremor. At first, he just forgot small things. Forgot people's names, where he put his keys. But then the disease got worse. He started forgetting his grandchildren. Once when I visited, he looked at me like a stranger. He didn't recognize me anymore. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the forgetting. It was the silence. Gradually, he lost the ability to speak. He no longer told me stories. He just sat there, looking out the window, his eyes empty. He was trapped in his own mind, unable to communicate with the outside world. I could see in his eyes the panic, the helplessness, as if he was screaming inside. But no sound could escape. Corey paused, taking a deep breath. Tears had begun to well in her eyes. And then, one night, he disappeared. The whole family panicked, looking for him. They found him the next morning, in the garden, his favorite place. He had fallen and couldn't get up on his own. He had been lying there all night, in the cold. The doctor said he had severe pneumonia. A few days later, he passed away. She quickly wiped away a tear rolling down her cheek. I always wondered, that night, lying alone in the garden, what did he think? Was he scared? Did he call anyone's name? Even if only in his head? My biggest fear. It's not ghosts, but dying in solitude and silence. Dying without anyone hearing your cry for help. Corey's story ended. No one spoke. Her story, though without ghosts or monsters, was far more terrifying than Matt's, because it was too real. It touched upon a primal human fear, and it resonated strangely with Arlo's story. A man trapped in silence, dying without being able to defend himself. Mila walked over and put her arm around her friend's shoulder. Thank you for sharing. Corey, I'm so sorry about your grandpa. It was a long time ago. Corey smiled sadly. But I think I understand why we have to be here. Because no one deserves to suffer that silence. No one. The atmosphere around the fire became strangely heavy and intimate. They were no longer an expedition team. They were a group of people facing their own fears, and finding empathy in each other. Suddenly, from the dark forest, a sound echoed. A crack. Very loud. Very clear. Like the sound of a large dry branch. Very large. Being stepped on and broken. Everyone froze. Their hearts seemed to stop. They whirled towards the sound. Jonas was the first to react. He sprang to his feet, grabbing the high-intensity flashlight beside him. He shone a powerful beam of light into the darkness. The light swept across the tree trunks. Nothing. Only forest and darkness. What was that? Matt whispered, his voice full of fear. Probably just a deer or something, Jonas said, his voice trying to remain calm. But Mila could see the muscles in his arm tensing. Large animals moving around at night is normal. But we haven't seen any animals all day, Corey said, her voice trembling. They stood still, listening. Silence fell again. But now it was no longer empty. It was menacing. It was as if something was out there, in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the campfire's light, watching them. Something very large. All right, Jonas said after a long moment. First shift begins. Nadia and I will stand guard. The rest of you go to your tents and sleep. Remember to zip them up tight. No one argued. They quickly retreated into their tents, leaving Jonas and Nadia alone by the fire. Inside the tent, Mila lay awake, listening to every tiny sound. That terrifying sound of breaking branches kept replaying in her head. It was too loud, too sudden. It didn't sound like an animal's footsteps. It sounded like a declaration. A declaration that said, "I know you are here." The night at Lakeside had just begun, and the peace, however fragile, had completely shattered that night. No one truly slept. After the horrifying sound of the breaking branch, Jonas and Nadia's guard shift passed in absolute silence. But a silence as taut as a violin string. Both sat facing each other across the dying campfire, their eyes constantly sweeping the darkness, ears strained to catch any unusual sound. But there was nothing more. The forest had returned to its eerie stillness. A silence now even more terrifying than noise. It was as if a predator had signaled, and now it was retracting, observing and waiting for its moment. When Mila and Matt changed shifts at 2 in the morning, the air grew even colder. The fire was just a pile of glowing embers. Matt, usually so lively, now sat silently next to Mila, clutching a hunting knife. Fear had stripped away his playful facade, revealing a raw tension. Mila was no better. Every shadow cast by the embers, every crackling sound of burning wood, made her heart jump. She wasn't just afraid of what was outside. She was afraid of what was growing inside her. Arlo's story was no longer a research topic. It had become a part of her. His pain, his injustice, now seemed to flow in her veins. She felt a tremendous burden of responsibility. She was the one who had brought her friends here, to this dangerous place. If anything happened, it would be her fault. Dawn arrived bringing no relief. Only a grey, tired light, revealing haggard, sleep-deprived faces. Breakfast passed in silence. Even Nadia no longer offered scientific explanations. They all felt it. This place did not welcome them. At noon, Jonas announced, "Best time of day. Strongest light possible. Let's start preparing." His words were like a command, pulling everyone out of their lethargic, anxious state. Work, though dangerous, was better than sitting idly and waiting in fear. The atmosphere of the campsite immediately changed. It transformed into a forward command post, a preparation area for a serious mission. Jonas and Matt opened large toolboxes, revealing a world of gleaming metal, black rubber, and complex technology. This wasn't tourist diving gear one usually saw at resorts. This was equipment for the harshest environments. Thick dry suits, designed to keep the wearer completely dry and insulated from the freezing water. Full face masks, looking like astronaut helmets. Integrated underwater radio communication systems, allowing the two divers to talk to each other and to the surface team. The flashlights weren't ordinary ones, but specialized light cannons, capable of emitting an intensely bright, white beam, cutting through the darkest water. Jonas explained each item, not just to the group, but also to reassure himself with familiar procedures. This is the primary air tank. 200 bar. Enough for about an hour and a half at the lake bed, depending on depth and activity level. This is the pony bottle, a complete backup system. If the primary system fails, we switch to this and immediately ascend. He pointed to the computers strapped to his and Matt's wrists. Dive computers. They will monitor depth, time, remaining air, and calculate our decompression stops. Their signal is law. No arguing. If it tells us to ascend, we ascend. Then he held out a large reel of line. Guideline. One person holds the reel. The other clips into the end of the line. We will always be connected to each other and to the starting point. No matter what happens. No matter if visibility is 0. We can always follow this line back. This is our lifeline. Every item, every procedure, was designed to combat chaos, to impose human order on a world that did not belong to them. While Jonas and Matt checked their equipment, the three girls also had their own tasks. Mila spread the hand-drawn map on the car hood, comparing it to the topographic map on her tablet, trying to precisely pinpoint the location Mrs. Agnes had indicated. Corey, with her sensitivity, had prepared dry towels, hot ginger tea, and thermal blankets. Seemingly simple things but crucial for combating hypothermia after surfacing. Nadia, meanwhile, became a battlefield nurse. She checked Jonas and Matt's blood pressure, heart rate, and blood oxygen saturation. All vitals stable, she declared, writing in her notebook. But both heart rates are slightly higher than normal. That's due to adrenaline. Completely normal. Try to breathe deeply and evenly before going underwater. She handed each of them an energy bar. Eat. You'll need the calories to fight the cold. As Jonas and Matt began to put on their dry suits, the tension became palpable. The friction of rubber against rubber. The definitive zip of zippers. The click of air tank buckles echoed in the silence. They were putting on armor, preparing to enter a battle, fully equipped. They no longer looked human. They resembled two astronauts, preparing to explore an alien planet. Jonas gathered the team for the final briefing. "Listen," he said, his voice through the mask sounding slightly different, distant and mechanical. "We'll enter the water from that rock outcrop over there. Based on Mila's map, the target area is on the north side of the lake, about 50 meters from shore, at a depth of about 25 meters. We'll swim on the surface to that position, then begin our descent." He looked at Matt. "I'll hold the reel. You'll be the primary searcher. We'll perform an expanding square search pattern. Always maintain visibility of each other's flashlight. Keep communication brief, clear, only essential information. What you see, report. What you feel, report." Then he looked at the three girls on shore. "Mila, you're in charge of communication. Keep the channel open at all times. We'll report our status every 5 minutes. If more than 5 minutes pass and you don't hear from us, call continuously for 1 minute. If there's still no answer, it's an emergency. But you are not to do anything. Absolutely do not enter the water. Stay on shore. Your job is to observe and record. Understood?" "Understood," all three said in unison, though Mila and Corey's voices were slightly shaky. "Good," Jonas said. He looked at everyone in turn. A long and meaningful gaze. "We do this carefully, and we'll all come back together." He clapped Matt on the shoulder. And then the two of them, with the heavy steps of their diving suits and air tanks, headed towards the water's edge. The entire campsite held its breath, watching. This was it. The point of no return. Jonas and Matt walked to a flat rock outcrop, where it met the deep water. They sat down at the edge of the rock, putting on their fins. They checked everything one last time. Air valves open. Dive computers started. Flashlights ready. They exchanged a nod. Jonas looked up at the shore, at his sister one last time. Then he leaned back and let himself fall into the water. Matt followed immediately after. The splash echoed, breaking the stillness of the lake's surface. For the surface team, it was just two loud noises, followed by silence. But for Jonas and Matt, it was a transition to another world. The cold hit them instantly. A fierce, brutal, bone-chilling cold, sweeping in like an invisible wall. It wasn't just temperature. It felt like hostility, as if the lake was trying to push them out. They floated on the surface, checking their equipment once more. Everything was fine. "Can you hear me?" Jonas's voice came through Matt's and the surface team's headsets. A mechanical but clear voice. "Copy that, boss," Matt replied. "Water's colder than my ex's heart." An attempt at humor. But no one laughed. "Begin movement to dive point," Jonas ordered. They swam on their backs, using their fins to propel themselves towards the center of the lake. The gray sky was the last thing they saw. Then, when they reached the correct position on Jonas's GPS, he signaled, "Dive, dive, dive." They exhaled from their suits together and began to sink. The world above the water vanished. The sound of the wind, the worried voices of the three girls, all were erased. Instead was a universe of silence, broken only by the single sound of their own lives, the steady, mechanical inhale, exhale through their regulators. Inhale. PSSSHHH. Exhale. Oob. Inhale. PSSSHHH. Exhale. Oob. That sound would be their only companion in this abyss. As they sank, the first sight that appeared astonished them. The rumor was true. The lake water was unnaturally clear. They could see the lake bed, though still quite far, with surprising clarity. The faint light from above penetrated, forming ethereal, dancing columns of light. Like in an abandoned underwater cathedral, they continued to sink. 5 meters. 10 meters. The colors of the world began to disappear. Red light was the first to be swallowed by the water. Then orange. Then yellow. Everything gradually became only different shades of green, blue, and black. 15 meters. Pressure began to press on their bodies. Their ears bopped, and they had to constantly equalize pressure. The cold grew more intense. They turned on their powerful flashlights. 2 blinding white beams cut through the dark blue water, shining down to the lake bed, and the lake bed appeared. It wasn't a normal lake bed with mud and sand. It was a landscape of death and oblivion. Giant, angular rocks, covered in slimy green moss, looked like ancient tombs. Large pine trees that had fallen centuries ago lay scattered, their branches long rotted away, leaving only black, twisted wooden skeletons, as if they had died in extreme agony. Between the rocks and tree trunks were deep, dark crevices, smaller abysses within the larger abyss. It was impossible to know how deep they went, or what might be lurking inside. "Report." Mila's voice came through their headsets, her voice clearly tense. "Reached bottom," Jonas replied. "Depth 23 meters. Good visibility. Beginning search." Jonas held out the reel. Matt clipped his safety hook to the end of the line. The lifeline was connected. They began to move. Slowly, methodically. They swam parallel to each other, about 3 meters apart. Their 2 beams of light swept back and forth across the lake bed, like the headlights of investigators at an ancient crime scene. Inhale. PSSSHHH. Exhale. Oob. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. They moved systematically, gradually expanding their search area. Nothing. Only rocks, rotten trees, and a heavy silence. "Do you feel it?" Matt suddenly said, his voice no longer confident. "Feel what?" Jonas asked, his eyes still on the search area. "Like, we're not the only two down here," Matt said. "Like someone's standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching us." "It's nitrogen," Jonas replied immediately. A classic scientific explanation. At this depth, nitrogen in the air we breathe can cause a mild narcotic effect. It can make you feel euphoric, anxious, or paranoid. Focus on the task. Check your air. Air's fine. I don't think it's nitrogen. Man. On the shore. The three girls heard the entire conversation. Corey clenched her hands. Nadia frowned, beginning to take notes. Paranoia symptoms. Could be early signs of nitrogen narcosis. They continued searching. 20 minutes. 25 minutes. The cold began to seep deeper. Their fingers started to go numb. The monotony of sweeping their lights back and forth began to affect their nerves. Suddenly, Matt's light stopped at a point. Jonas, come here and look. Jonas swam closer. Under the light, a small, shiny object was caught on a branch. It was a silver spoon, the kind used for dessert. Tarnished but still recognizable. Must have been dropped by a picnicker years ago, Jonas said. They were about to swim away. But Matt spoke again. Look closely. Man. There are letters engraved on the handle. Jonas shone his light closer. Indeed. On the handle of the silver spoon was engraved a single letter, in a stylized uppercase script. The letter S. Samuel. Mila's voice came through the walkie-talkie. A whisper of astonishment. The first victim Arlo had witnessed. A coincidence? Or was this a sign? A warning? They had no time to think. They had to continue. But now, the atmosphere had grown heavier. This lake didn't just hold Arlo's secret. It was a graveyard. 30 minutes passed. The air in their tanks had started to drop significantly. Jonas signaled. Only 15 minutes left before they had to start ascending. Despair began to creep in. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe the box didn't exist. Or maybe it was buried too deep. They were searching in the final quadrant of the target area. A place near a large cluster of rocks that looked like a ruined altar. And then, Jonas's beam swept across something. It wasn't the natural curve of a rock. It wasn't the roughness of a tree trunk. It was a straight line. A right angle. Something made by human hands. Stop! Jonas ordered. His voice tense. He swam closer. A corner of a metal object was protruding from the fine mud and sand. It was rusted and covered in a thin biofilm. But it was unmistakable. Report, Mila said over the walkie-talkie. Her voice filled with hope and anxiety. We found it. Jonas exhaled. I think we found it. On shore. A cheer erupted. Corey and Mila hugged each other. Tears welling up. Nadia also smiled. A rare sigh of relief. Underwater, Jonas and Matt began to act. They used their hands, gently fanning away the accumulated mud and sand from the object that had been there for over 60 years. Gradually, its shape emerged. An iron box. It was larger than they expected. Almost a meter long. And half a meter wide. It was made of thick iron, reinforced with metal straps at the corners. And on its front was a massive padlock. A brass padlock that had turned green from oxidation. Huge and heavy. They had found it. In the cold, dark depths of this lake. They had found Arlo's buried voice. Prepare the lift bag. Jonas ordered. Matt took out a neatly rolled orange nylon bag. He tied it to the handle of the box. Then, he took a small air tank and began to inflate the bag. The bag slowly inflated, expanding. It began to pull the box from the grip of the mud. The box shifted for the first time in 60 years. It was a moment of triumph. A brief, glorious moment. And it was also when the abyss decided to look back. The moment the box was completely lifted from the lake bed, everything changed. The first thing they felt was a change in temperature. It wasn't a gradual change. It was a shock. A bone-chilling, insidious cold. Sweeping in like an invisible wall. It was so cold they could feel it through their thick gloves and dry suits. What the hell? Matt yelled over the walkie-talkie. Temperature. It's dropping. Jonas looked at his dive computer. The numbers were dropping wildly. 4 degrees. 3 degrees. 1 degree. -2 degrees. That was impossible. Water couldn't get that cold without freezing. But it was happening. The second thing that happened was visibility. The fine mud and sand on the lake bed, which had already begun to settle, was suddenly stirred up. Not a natural disturbance, but a violent explosion, as if a giant, invisible hand had just slammed down on the lake bed right next to them. Within seconds, their visibility dropped from 10 meters to 0. They were engulfed in a black cloud, an impenetrable mudstorm. The light from their powerful flashlights was just a useless halo, unable to penetrate more than a few centimeters. Visibility lost. Repeat. Complete visibility lost, Jonas yelled, trying to remain calm. Matt, hold on to the line. Thank you for listening until the very end. You are listening to the story Eyes Staring from the Lake Bed on the Whisper Horror Channel. If you feel a shiver, don't forget to follow and share with anyone who dares to listen with you tonight. Part 2 will be released tomorrow night at 9 p.m. And this time, light won't help them anymore. Sleep well. If you still dare to close your eyes.